Hello, friends. Are you watching this alone or with someone? Tell me in the comments.
Sorry, this dinner's just for the achievers, the text read, with a smug little smiley face at the end, like she didn't even hear it. The slap wrapped in glitter, the kind of message that stings more because it was sent with no warning, no buildup, no drama, just an offhand dismissal from someone who shares my DNA. That was my sister Claire, perfect Claire. She didn't even call me, just sent the text like I was an afterthought, like she was tossing me the crumbs of her oh-so-accomplished life. I stared at my phone for a good minute, thinking maybe I was misreading it. Maybe there was some kind of inside joke I had missed, or maybe she was trying to be funny in that dry, sarcastic way she sometimes used when she wanted to act like we were still close. But it wasn't a joke. I reread the message and felt my stomach twist into that old, familiar knot. The one I used to feel in high school when she'd walk into the room, instantly smarter, prettier, and more interesting than me, just by existing. Claire had always been the star. In a way, I got used to it, even learned to accept my role as the quieter sister, the one who kept things steady while she soared. I was the one who listened, who gave advice, who never made waves. But this wasn't just exclusion, it was a statement. And the worst part? She genuinely didn't think I'd be hurt. That smiley face said everything. This dinner isn't for you, and I'm not even going to pretend otherwise. It was my mom who'd mentioned the dinner a few days ago. Just a little get-together, she said. Claire's organizing something for some people from work, maybe some cousins, a few family friends, just folks who've been doing big things lately. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, yeah, Claire had just gotten a promotion, senior strategy lead or whatever the hell it was, and she'd been posting about it all over LinkedIn like she'd just cured cancer, but I figured it was one of those superficial things, a cheers over wine type of night. I didn't realize it was a curated affair for what she called achievers, like she was the admissions office at some invisible Ivy League club, and I was just some townie with no credentials. I sat on my couch that evening in sweatpants, eating leftovers from the fridge, the kind of sad dinner you don't even bother to heat up properly. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to see photos popping up online. I didn't want to be tagged or forgotten in real time. The silence in my apartment pressed in like a weight. I could almost hear the clinking glasses, the laughter, the polite stories about someone's startup success, or how someone else finally made partner at their firm. All while I was over here trying to convince my boss that the monthly newsletter needed a redesign. It hit me then. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really hadn't done anything worth celebrating. But the thing is, I've never been lazy. I work hard. I've held the same job for 7 years in a marketing firm that doesn't throw titles around like confetti. I keep clients happy, I stay late when I have to, and I've pulled together more campaigns than Claire has strategy decks. But there's no glamour in stability. Nobody claps for the person who doesn't mess up. There are no awards for being quietly competent. And in Claire's world, if you don't shine, you don't get a seat at the table. I got up, poured myself a glass of wine, cheap, red, and bitter, and stared at the wall. My fingers hovered over my phone. I thought about texting her back, something passive-aggressive like, "Have fun with the real winners." Or maybe something direct like, "You didn't have to be so obvious about it." But I didn't. What was the point? She wouldn't get it. Or worse, she would get it and just not care. Then on impulse, I opened my contacts and scrolled. Past old coworkers, college friends I hadn't spoken to in years. A few dates I never followed up on. I stopped on one name, Jessica Lynn, a cousin, sort of. Technically a second cousin, daughter of my dad's half-sister. We hadn't talked in forever, but she was always the one with the family dirt. She knew who was dating who was going broke, who just got into a weird MLM. She also had a tendency to overshare and whisper things she shouldn't, which, under normal circumstances, made her annoying. But right now, she might be useful. I didn't call her, not yet. Just stared at her name, trying to decide what the hell I was doing. What would I even say? "Hey, Jessica. Heard you might know if my family thinks I'm a loser?" Yeah, that'd go over great. And then something strange happened. A memory surfaced. One I hadn't thought about in years. It was from a family BBQ. maybe 10 years ago, Claire had just landed her first big job out of college, and everyone was fawning over her. I was still finishing grad school, trying to find my place. And I remember sitting alone near the grill, picking at cold potato salad, when Alan, yes, that Alan Cho, the cousin we never really talked about, sat beside me. We weren't close, but we weren't strangers. He handed me a beer and said, "They'll always see her first. Just make sure you're the one they remember." At the time, it sounded like some fortune cookie nonsense. But now, with a glass of wine in my hand, and the ache of being forgotten still fresh, it felt different, more like a challenge. I grabbed my phone again, my thumb hovering over Jessica's name. This time, I didn't think. I hit call. It rang twice before she answered, voice breathless and excited, like she'd been waiting for someone to spill something worth whispering. "Marissa, you watching the news?" I blinked. "No, we are." "Oh my God," she said. "You're gonna want to sit down. Alan just made a deal, a huge deal. He's all over the news. It's like millions, maybe over 100 million. It's insane." I stared at the blank TV screen in front of me, then slowly picked up the remote. As the local news flickered to life, I saw his face, older, sharper, powerful, and underneath it, the headline burned across the bottom of the screen like a neon sign in the dark. Local CEO finalizes landmark deal worth $120 million. And just like that, everything shifted. I sat back on the couch, heart pounding, the wine suddenly sour in my mouth. Because now everyone was going to remember him, and I had a feeling they'd be calling me next. The morning after Claire's dinner, the one I wasn't invited to, the one she had so breezily categorized as an event for the achievers, a term that still tasted like vinegar in my mouth, I woke up with a heavy stillness in the air, the kind of lingering quiet that only seems to arrive after a moment of realization, when something inside of you shifts just enough to make everything else feel a little off-kilter. I had fallen asleep on the couch with my phone still in my hand, the TV remote on the floor, and the last words from Jessica still echoing somewhere in the back of my mind. Alan just made a deal. Millions, maybe more. I didn't rush to look it up, not at first. I got up, shuffled into the kitchen, made coffee out of habit, the way people go through motions when they don't know how to process what they've just heard. But as I stood there waiting for the machine to gurgle out that first bitter cup, I finally reached for my phone and opened my browser. And there it was, right at the top of every local news site, and even spilling into some national business feeds. CEO Alan Cho secures landmark $120 million acquisition deal, followed by photos of him in a crisp gray suit, shaking hands with some other executive, both of them grinning like cats who got the cream. Alan Cho, my cousin, or second cousin technically, who used to show up at family picnics with store-bought cupcakes and a crooked smile, was suddenly worth more than everyone in our family combined. The article was filled with glowing adjectives and vague references to innovation, leadership, and strategic vision, none of which told me anything concrete, but all of which painted a very clear picture. Alan had arrived. And more importantly, people were paying attention. I didn't even finish the coffee. I stood there, phone in hand, scrolling through article after article, photos of him being escorted into buildings, giving speeches, and laughing at galas I had never heard of. Within minutes, I saw the ripple effect happening in real time. My group chat started pinging, my phone buzzing every few seconds with texts from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Aunt Judy sent a photo of Alan and wrote, "So proud of our family." Cousin Amanda chimed in with, "Isn't this amazing? Marissa, you and Alan used to be so close." A lie, if we're being honest, but one that clearly served her interest now. I felt the shift like a physical thing, like tectonic plates rearranging beneath me. 24 hours ago, I had been invisible, just the underachieving sister who wasn't invited to dinner because she hadn't done anything notable. And now, by virtue of bloodline alone, I was back in the family spotlight, not for anything I'd actually done, but because I happened to share a few branches on the family tree with the guy who just changed everything. And Claire? Claire had been silent all morning. No texts, No comments, no selfies from the dinner, no little updates meant to rub it in. And that silence said more than 1,000 humble brag posts ever could. She was watching it happen too, and she was calculating. Because while Claire was many things, organized, ambitious, maddeningly polished, she was also smart enough to know that Alan's meteoric rise had just thrown a grenade into the carefully curated social hierarchy she'd built, where she was always the top-tier cousin, the one everyone looked up to, the one who invited and excluded at will. But now Alan was the story. And by proximity, so was I. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I answered Aunt Judy's call. She never called just to chat. Her conversations were always mission-oriented, full of barely concealed motives and that sweet, syrupy tone she used when she was trying to extract information. "Marissa, sweetheart," she cooed, like we hadn't spent the last few years exchanging only the most generic holiday messages. "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Isn't it exciting about Alan?" I kept my voice measured, polite, just vague enough to make her work for it. "It's definitely something," I said, taking a slow sip of wine. "He's always been low-key, so it's kind of wild seeing him everywhere now." She paused, just long enough to hint that she wasn't getting what she wanted. "You know," she continued, "I was thinking maybe we should have a little celebration. Something for the family, maybe even at Claire's place. Or if you'd prefer hosting, I'm sure we could get everyone together. I mean, you and Alan were always such good friends." The pivot wasn't subtle, and it wasn't surprising. She wanted access. They all did. The same people who didn't think I was worth a dinner invitation the day before were now trying to figure out how close I was to the new family golden boy, hoping I'd open a door for them, or at least get them into a room where Alan might be. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. I let her talk, let her fish, let her drop hints about wanting to reconnect, and how family was so important, especially now. And while she was talking, I made a silent promise to myself, not out of spite, not even out of anger, but out of something deeper, sharper, something that had been growing quietly in the background for years. I was going to find my own way to the table, not as Alan's cousin, not as Claire's sister, but as someone they had to acknowledge in her own right. I didn't know how yet, and I didn't have a plan, but I had something else, leverage, timing, and a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible, and that was going to be enough to start with. In the weeks following Alan's meteoric rise to local celebrity status, after his face had been plastered across financial headlines, his voice quoted in business columns I used to skim through while waiting at the mechanic, and his name thrown around like confetti at family events I hadn't been invited to in years, I started to notice something strange, subtle at first, but increasingly unmistakable. People who had always looked through me were now looking at me, not quite directly, but with that soft curiosity that suggested they had begun to reconsider who they thought I was. It didn't happen all at once, and it certainly wasn't accompanied by any grand apologies or public acknowledgments, but it was there, unfolding in the way people started returning my calls, a little faster, answering my emails with actual punctuation, or even, occasionally, asking for my opinion like it mattered. Claire, of course, handled the shift with all the grace of a beauty queen told, "She's not the only one in the spotlight anymore." She didn't say anything outright, because that wasn't her style. She preferred veiled compliments and casual dominance. But I could see it in the way her texts to our family group chat changed tone, from confident updates about work and networking mixers to more frequent mentions of stress, meetings running late, and how she was juggling so much lately, as if she needed to remind everyone that she was still the busiest, the most in demand, the one operating at a level the rest of us could only dream of. It was subtle, strategic even, but I saw right through it, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't make me smirk. I had spent the better part of my career doing work that wasn't flashy, but was solid. Marketing campaigns for mid-sized firms, social strategy for nonprofit events, email sequences that converted steadily, if not spectacularly. And I had long accepted that my name would never be on any billboard, that I wasn't going to be a keynote speaker at some tech summit. But something about Alan's sudden explosion onto the public stage made me reconsider what I had been telling myself for years. That visibility wasn't necessary, that doing the work was enough, that staying in the background meant I was humble and grounded and didn't need the spotlight. But maybe, just maybe, I had used that story to protect myself from the sting of never being seen. So I made a decision, not a loud one, not a declaration, but a quiet pivot that started with one simple act. I reached out to Alan. I didn't ask for a favor, didn't grovel, didn't pitch myself like I was selling Girl Scout cookies. I sent a short message that said something honest, professional, and just the right amount of confident. If you're looking for someone to handle content strategy on the next phase of the rollout, I have bandwidth. Let me know if you're interested. I didn't expect a reply, certainly not the same day, but a few hours later, he responded, almost too casually. Knew you'd reach out. Let's talk tomorrow. The call was straightforward, all business. Alan had always had that rare ability to talk like he was telling you a secret, even when he was giving you instructions. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out what he needed. Ghostwriting for a series of executive thought leadership pieces, brand positioning angles for press interviews, and someone to liaise with his overworked PR team without making them feel undermined. I took the gig, not because I needed the money, though it didn't hurt, but because I knew what this was, an opportunity to attach my skills to something undeniably visible. For the first time in my career, the results of my work were public. The pieces I ghost wrote were being shared widely, quoted by people who didn't know me, reposted by executives who assumed some communications team had put them together. No one saw my name, of course, but I didn't care, not yet, because the recognition didn't need to be loud to be real. I knew what I was building, and then something unexpected happened. My inbox, which used to be a wasteland of internal memos and automated reports, began to fill with messages that had subject lines like, "Quick connect," and "Love that piece on strategic scaling." People had started to assume I was connected, and in the game of perception, that's almost as valuable as being actually powerful. It wasn't just the messages that changed. The way I carried myself shifted too. I began to walk into rooms, both virtual and physical, with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. Not the fake kind you wear like a mask when you're trying to impress a new client, but the grounded kind that comes from knowing you've done the work, and now you're finally being led into the room where decisions are made. I took another quiet step. I launched a blog, something I had started and abandoned a half-dozen times before, but this time I kept it lean, focused, and real. No inspirational fluff, no generic marketing hacks, just thoughtful analysis on branding, strategy, and the invisible labor behind campaigns that actually work. The engagement was small at first, just a handful of readers, some familiar faces, a few polite comments, but then suddenly, I noticed Claire had subscribed. She didn't say anything about it, didn't text me, didn't forward a post, but I saw her name in the subscriber list. I knew she had read at least one of the articles. And the next time we spoke, briefly, at a birthday lunch for our cousin's kid, she mentioned branding in a way that was suspiciously aligned with a piece I'd written. I didn't call her out. I just smiled, nodded, and let her borrow what she needed. Because sometimes, being copied is the clearest sign that someone finally sees you as a threat. The first win was small, quiet, and it didn't come with applause or a shiny plaque. But it was mine, it was clever, it was deliberate, and it was just the beginning. The moment Claire texted me a passive-aggressive congratulations about my clever little blog, a phrase she dressed up with an exclamation mark, as if enthusiasm could mask the condescension. It was as though a switch flipped inside of me, one I didn't even realize I had been sitting on for most of my adult life. It wasn't just the phrasing that rubbed me the wrong way, although the word little lodged in my chest like a stone. It was the way she always managed to find the precise register to keep me one rung below her on the ladder of family relevance, professional prestige, and social capital. She had turned polite minimization into an art form, weaponized subtlety into something so sophisticated that even when she was cutting you down, She made you feel like it was your fault for noticing. I didn't respond to the message right away. I let it sit there, glowing on my screen like an ember I refused to blow on. Instead, I opened my laptop and got to work. The nonprofit campaign I'd taken on a few weeks earlier, one I had pitched without a formal invitation, and one with nothing more than a concise email and a link to a 3-post portfolio, had started to show real momentum. Organic growth, steady engagement, and more importantly, interest from adjacent organizations who suddenly wanted to chat strategy. And what had begun as a simple favor for a local animal shelter, a social refresh, a donation funnel, some targeted content, had evolved into a proof of concept I could build into something larger, something visible, something I could put my name on, without waiting for someone like Claire to validate it. The irony, of course, was that the more I leaned into these quiet, unglamorous wins, the sort that didn't come with applause or 6-figure bonuses, but still moved the needle in meaningful ways, the more Claire seemed to tighten her grip on her own narrative. She started posting more frequently, tagging high-profile colleagues, humble bragging about late nights and executive brainstorming sessions, with photos that looked suspiciously staged. She mentioned a charity gala in 3 separate posts over one weekend, dropping names like breadcrumbs, as if hoping someone would finally take the hint and ask her to elaborate. I took a different approach. I said less. I showed results. I started tracking analytics with obsessive precision, measuring not just likes and clicks, but conversions, volunteer signups, and donor retention. I built a dashboard, something I'd never had time for before, and started sending out reports to clients before they even asked. I noticed how much power there was in anticipation, how much confidence could be projected simply by being the one who didn't need to be asked twice. And somewhere in the midst of all that work, during those long nights when I was still tweaking landing pages or rewriting donation appeals, I realized that I wasn't trying to compete with Claire anymore. I was building something else, my own game, my own rules. And just when it seemed like Claire had finally reclaimed control, she had secured a speaking slot at the charity gala she'd been hinting about, an event hosted by one of Alan's recently acquired partner organizations. Jessica called me, breathless and unusually excited, to tell me that Claire had pitched a speech idea that sounded suspiciously familiar. "She's talking about authentic brand storytelling," Jessica said, her voice laced with intrigue. "And she's even using examples from nonprofit campaigns. Marissa, it sounds a lot like what you've been writing about." I should have been shocked, or angry, or at least indignant. But I wasn't. I was prepared. Because here's the thing Claire didn't realize. While she was busy performing success, I had been documenting mine. Every proposal, every data set, every design mock-up and narrative framework. Archived, time-stamped, and ready to be presented at a moment's notice. I had emails, I had drafts. I had even sent myself a voice memo weeks earlier describing the core idea behind the campaign structure, a habit I picked up from an old mentor who used to say, "Cover your future ass like your life depends on it, because one day it will." Still, I didn't rush to expose her. I didn't storm into the planning committee's inbox waving my digital receipts like a lunatic. Instead, I reached out to Alan. He had invited me to coffee once, after our initial collaboration, and I had politely declined at the time, not because I wasn't interested, but because I hadn't yet decided how close I wanted to orbit his world. But now I saw the opportunity not just to protect my work, but to pivot the narrative entirely. I emailed him a concise note, linking my recent nonprofit campaign and mentioning in passing that Claire had apparently found some inspiration there. I didn't accuse, I didn't whine. I simply planted the seed and let it grow. The next day, Alan responded, not with a meeting, but with an invitation. "Join me at the gala," he wrote, "as a guest of the foundation. I'd like you to be part of the press roundtable afterward. There's some interest in your campaign structure." I read the email 3 times, then once more, just for the satisfaction. Claire didn't know yet. I kept it quiet. I wanted her to step into that room thinking she had the stage to herself, that she had absorbed my work and repackaged it effectively enough to sell it as her own. I wanted her to feel untouchable, until the moment she realized that the very concept she was building her speech around would be sitting 2 rows back in the audience, waiting not to sabotage, but simply to exist, visibly, authentically, undeniably, because revenge doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes the most satisfying payback is presence. And that night, I planned to show up, not to watch her fall, but to remind her that she's not the only one capable of rising. Not anymore. From the moment I stepped into the hall where the gala was being held, with the walls draped in velvet and the kind of lighting that makes even ordinary people look like magazine profiles, I could feel the charged, anticipatory energy that only gathers when powerful people come together to witness each other's self-congratulations. The entire venue smelled faintly of expensive perfume, ambition, and carefully disguised desperation. Servers floated between conversations, carrying silver trays topped with hors d'oeuvres most people couldn't pronounce. And everywhere I turned, I saw handshakes disguised as negotiations and smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. It was exactly the kind of event Claire had always dreamed of headlining, and judging by the way she moved through the crowd, graceful, calculated, wearing a sapphire dress that probably cost more than my rent, it was clear she believed she had finally arrived. I didn't walk in through the front entrance, because that wasn't how Alan wanted to play it. He had arranged for me to come in through a side entrance typically reserved for press and support staff. A strategic choice, he said, to preserve the surprise until the moment he needed it. At first, I found it insulting, as though I were being hidden or held in reserve like some secret weapon. But as I stood behind the velvet curtain, watching Claire take the stage with that air of easy poise she'd mastered so long ago, I realized that for once, I wasn't being hidden. I was being positioned. She began her speech the way I expected, by listing accomplishments not directly her own, but adjacent enough to bask in their reflection. The success of the foundation, the importance of strategic communication and nonprofit growth, and how, in her words, authentic storytelling is no longer optional. It's the engine that drives trust. Her tone was confident, measured, and utterly familiar. I knew every beat of that speech, not because I had heard it before, but because I had written its skeleton weeks ago in a notebook beside my bed, the same notebook that now sat zipped inside my bag, complete with dated entries and a signature design flow no one else had seen, except, apparently, Claire. The room responded as expected, nodding thoughtfully, clapping politely, and glancing toward Alan, who sat near the stage, inscrutable as ever, his expression giving nothing away. I couldn't tell if Claire recognized me sitting 2 rows behind him, but I hoped she didn't, not yet. I wanted her to feel invincible for just a few more moments. And then, as she finished her closing statement, thanking the organization and inviting everyone to connect after for deeper conversations about how strategic messaging can drive human connection, Alan stood up, offered a polite applause, and turned toward the podium. I expected him to make a short acknowledgement, maybe wrap things up with the kind of businesslike gratitude that rich men use to sound humble. But instead he smiled, and not the empty kind either, but a sharp, deliberate smile that suggested something was about to shift. He began by thanking Claire for her contribution, then smoothly transitioned into a mention of new talent and innovation bubbling up in the communications space. In fact, he said, pausing just long enough to let the tension land, I want to recognize someone who's played a quiet but substantial role in reshaping how our message has reached the public over the last few months. I felt every eye in the room scan for context, interest sharpening in real time. She's someone many of you know, perhaps not for her titles, but certainly for her work. And tonight, I'm pleased to formally acknowledge her contributions to not just our brand narrative, but to the broader ecosystem of social storytelling that helped shape the campaign we're celebrating this evening. Marissa Parker, stand up, would you? Time slowed. The clapping started almost immediately, the polite, curious kind reserved for people you suddenly wish you knew better. I stood, not dramatically, not sheepishly, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has waited years to be seen on her own terms. And I met Claire's eyes across the room, Her expression didn't crumble. Claire didn't crumble. But there was a flicker, a glitch in the mask. The briefest moment of recalibration that told me she was rearranging every assumption she had ever made about who I was and what I was capable of. Afterward, at the press roundtable, journalists asked predictable questions about brand growth and message integrity, and I answered them with the kind of precision that comes only from doing the work yourself, not borrowing it from someone else. A few industry reps handed me cards, one of them even suggesting a collaboration for a new advocacy initiative launching in the fall. It wasn't a life-changing offer, not yet, but it was a door, and for once, it was opening toward me. Claire found me near the coat check, her voice smooth but tight, her smile more controlled than warm. "That was unexpected," she said, tucking a loose curl behind her ear, in the way she always did when she was flustered but trying not to show it. "You look confident up there." I tilted my head, letting the silence stretch just a second longer than comfortable. I was. I've been doing this kind of work for a long time. It was just the first time anyone put my name on it. She didn't apologize, of course. Claire would never give me the satisfaction of a full confession, but she didn't argue either. And maybe that in itself was the win. Not her groveling, not some dramatic fall from grace, but her acknowledgement, however reluctant, that I had earned this. We left the building separately, she in a rideshare she'd likely timed for dramatic effect, me on foot, walking a few blocks through the cool night air, letting the tension drain from my shoulders as the city hummed around me. I thought about what Alan had said, about timing and positioning, about knowing when to step forward and when to step aside. And I thought about what came next. Not revenge, not more games, but something else entirely. Because once you've been underestimated for long enough, and you finally get a taste of what it feels like to be recognized, not as someone's plus one, not as the other sister, but as a force in your own right, there's no going back to smallness, no shrinking yourself to fit back into a mold you never wanted in the first place. I didn't know exactly what my next move would be. Maybe a new firm, maybe a public-facing role, maybe something I hadn't yet imagined. But I knew this. Claire had built her empire on the assumption that I'd always stay quiet in the wings. And now she knows I've learned how to take the stage.